The NFL draft is just about 2 weeks away, so we wanted to bring in a special guest, Dane Brugler of The Athletic, here with us today on Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast, and you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Sign up today, and from there, you'll get news, analysis, one-on-one conversations, and bonus content from me. No hashtags, no apps, no filters. I text you, you text me. We all have a good time. Again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to become an insider today. I am David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers and everydayers. As always, I appreciate your continued support for the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. My apologies to the everydayers who were expecting a Thursday episode but did not get one. Insiders, you already know this, but I spent literally my entire day on Wednesday doing my taxes. So the upside to being an independent person who works for myself is I work for myself, but the downside is I don't get taxed throughout the year. All my money is tax-free as I get it. So at the end of the year, I file my taxes and the IRS comes after me and says, give us this really big check one time a year. So, again, every upside has a downside, every downside has an upside. But because of that and the stress and strain that it put on me and my wife, who are the co-owners of our LLC, did not get an episode out for Thursday, and then I had to sit down with Dane Brugler early on Thursday to get ready for our Friday episode. So the good news there is you get Dane Brugler, and this episode is going to drop a little bit earlier than it normally would have because we did not have that other episode. So every day is hopefully that makes up for it a little bit. And speaking of, let's bring in Dane Brugler. All right, everybody, happy to be joined by Dane Brugler, the author and creator of The Beast. And if you haven't heard of it or haven't read it yet, it truly meets the title. 300 plus pages of player evaluations information. So make sure you check that out. Dane Brugler on Twitter at DP Brugler, of course, from The Athletic. So let's get right into the draft talks. And obviously with the Washington Commanders, the entire focus is number 2, right? If you're Adam Peters and your coach, Dan Quinn, has been delivering this message of explosive, aggressive play, and your offensive coordinator is who's known for the air raid, but swears that it's not the air raid, and all those things that come with it. Which quarterback are you taking at number 2?
For me personally, Drake Maye from North Carolina is my number 2 quarterback in this class behind Caleb Williams. I think when you look at the full package of skills, he's just 3 years removed from high school. He's still just 21 years old. But what he's been able to do, especially the last 2 years, he's the only college quarterback over the last 2 years that has over 9,000 total yards. He does it with his arm, does it with his legs. Is he a finished product? But by no means is he that. He's not a guy that you're going to look at and say, polished, ready to go, everything's perfect. He's going to need some time. There's going to be some bumps along the road when he's going to start as a rookie. And when he does, there's going to be some bumps, but you live with that for the long term and what he's going to bring. He is one of the best third down players in this class with this ability to work outside the pocket. That really stands out from his tape. And I'm a big believer in the older brother theory, where when you grow up with older brothers, you're just a little bit more competitive. You got this toughness to him. You have this edge to you. And with Drake Maye, he has 3 older brothers, all played high-level college athletics. He was always playing up a level growing up. And his whole family says that, he grew up in a family of athletes. His whole family says he's the most competitive of the group. So, although I think he's cut from the same cloth as Justin Herbert, I think a lot of expectations are similar with these two players. So for me, Drake Maye would be that guy. But I can understand why they would lean Jayden Daniels, because especially with Dan Quinn, obviously being a defensive coach, he brings a different perspective to this. Who does he not want to have to game plan for and really figure out how to stop? With Jayden Daniels, you have to really attack him in a certain way because he can beat you with his arm and his legs a little bit differently than a Drake Maye can. And with the goal would be to find a quarterback that's going to create explosive plays. Nobody had more explosive plays this past year than Jayden Daniels. He accounted for 90 plays of 20 plus yards. I don't know if that's a record or not. We only have the data going back 5 or 6 years, but I would be shocked if anyone's ever had more than that. To put that in perspective, Joe Burrow in his amazing season not too long ago for LSU, he had 87 plays of 20 plus yards, and that was in 15 games. And Jayden Daniels had 90 in 12 games. So whether he's doing it with a deep ball, he never met a slot fade he didn't like. But even on throws of 20 plus yards, he had 22-0 touchdown interception ratio this year, 67% percentage on throws of 20 plus yards. So he can win deep. He can, win with his legs. One thing that does bother me a little bit with him is when he does feel that rush and he drops his eyes, he's more likely to take off and run as he is opposed to finding that second chance throw. And in the NFL, it won't be quite that easy, especially when Jayden Daniels likes to prove how tough he is every time he runs the ball. And you just have to get that out of him and say, look, body preservation over showing me how tough you are when you're finishing these runs. But both these guys are good quarterbacks. And so I could understand if the Commanders land at either one of these two players with that number 2 pick.
Yeah, and I think you outlined that beautifully, and the debate will rage on every time we talk quarterbacks on this show, Dane. I get some people who love Jayden, some people who hate Jayden and love Drake, and vice versa, and it's going to continue on as we're a couple weeks away from the NFL draft here. But the biggest conversation in the quarterback room is obviously Caleb Williams, right? And he's the number 1 pick. He's the number 1 guy. He's presumed to be going to Chicago. So while Jayden and Drake are very, very close in evaluation for a lot of people and a lot of fits, how far ahead is Caleb Williams? Like, is he so far ahead that there really should be zero talk of the Bears potentially going a different direction?
I think there's at least should be a conversation. I don't think that a Caleb is this some can't miss type of player, especially when you have a guy with the fumbles that he did. He led the country in fumbles over the last 2 years. That's something that really can change the scoreboard. Especially at the NFL level, when these guys are closing in on you faster and faster. But I think when you just look at the whole body of work with Caleb, rare football awareness, so even more than just a physical skill set, what he does with his arm, what he does with, his legs to buy time, he has rare football awareness, and it shows up in a lot of different ways. Didn't throw an interception on 3rd or 4th down in his career at USC, 200 pass attempts, which is pretty impressive. And then you just have a guy that I think maybe the most impressive thing about him is he's always in a ready to throw position. So it doesn't matter how awkward it is. It doesn't matter. He has the body balance, the torque through his hips and the arm where he can make that throw and still be accurate. So Caleb is he's a little bit different. And in terms of how he attacks the game and, the off field stuff, I'm not the painting the nails. Who cares? Crying in the stands shows me he cares. I really don't understand the controversy with that. The only controversy that I put a little bit of stock into is he wants to be an entrepreneur. Caleb wants to be the Jay-Z of the NFL, and that's great. No problem with that. But as long as the winning comes first, as long as he's doing what he needs to do on the field. So, I don't think this is a hard decision for the Bears. Even as much as I do like Drake Maye, who is my number 2 quarterback, as much as I do like Jayden Daniels, I don't think this is a hard decision for them. At the end of the day, Caleb Williams is going to be a Chicago Bear.
Yeah, I feel pretty confident in that as well. I know a lot of Commanders fans would love to see the DMV kid come back home, and even he himself has mentioned, that's home. So obviously, there's always an upside.
And you make that phone call, right? I mean, if you're the Commanders, you make that phone call and say, "Hey, this is what we're willing to offer. Can we talk about this? Can we, you at least make that call and you force the Bears to say no." Which I'm sure both of us agree. We're guessing the Bears are going to say no.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Lauren Cox, Locked On Bears, says there's no package to get them to move off of Caleb, but you have to try. Like you mentioned, you got to at least play the game and make the call, make them say no, like you said. Don't go anywhere because we are not done speaking with Dane Brugler, NFL draft analyst for The Athletic. More with him coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. It is playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Major League Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single one of those games, series, or title competition odds. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Literally $150 no matter what. Win or lose, you get $150 in bonus bets that you can put on spreads, you can put on props, you can put on parlays, you can build your own parlays, bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. The Boston Celtics are favorites to win the NBA Finals, so if you think they're going to win the whole thing, put your bet on them to win the whole thing. Put some bets on them to win individual games. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Nothing better than guaranteed bonus bets. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day. Every day. Make sure you come back next week. We'll have more draft coverage. We're going to get really heavy into our draft coverage. Insiders, you got some NFL draft film study, including, yes, of course, the quarterbacks we're going to talk about even deeper and even more in depth. And I'm actually going to do some comparison film studies where we're going to look at like Jayden and Drake and JJ and probably even Caleb, just to be thorough and do our due diligence. We'll look at each of them on the perimeter. We'll look at each of them under pressure. We're going to do a lot of fun things with the film studies. And then, of course, I will be telling you all what we learned on the film studies on these episodes. So make sure you're coming back next week. And, of course, after that, it's NFL Draft Week, and the whole thing is going to get really, really exciting really soon. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your television all day? Do you have to turn down the volume when all the shouting begins? Well, make your switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest story without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now let's continue our conversation with the Athletics NFL draft analyst, Dane Brugler. And the Commanders certainly have a lot of picks to do with. They've got 6 picks in the top 100 this year. So Dane, let's assume they don't sell a lot of those picks, move up to number 1. With those top 100 picks outside of quarterback, where do you think the Commanders need to focus their energies? What do they need to achieve in the first 2 days in the NFL draft this year?
I think offensive tackle jumps off the screen as like, oh, yeah, we need to upgrade this position. We need to get younger. We need to get, create upgrades with youth. And this is an outstanding year for offensive tackles in the first 40, 50 picks. The question will be how many of these guys go in the first round? How many are off the board in the top 25, top 30, just ahead of where the Commanders are picking in that early second round? That will play a part in this. Who is left for them? Say that there's 6, 7 offensive tackles already drafted. How do the Commanders feel about that next tier? Talking about Patrick Paul from Houston. Commanders fans know him. His brother is already on the roster. That'd be obviously a fun storyline with 2 brothers on the same offensive line meeting room and potentially starting together at some point. But above all, they need to get better at offensive tackle. So I think that stands out. I think edge rusher, just getting more pressure on the quarterback. I think all 32 teams are looking for more depth at the edge rusher position. And so I think this is a class where you can get better on the outside, even though it's not, I wouldn't call it a great class for pass rushers. We're going to see 4, maybe 5 go in the first round. And then in the second, third rounds, you've got guys like Adisa Isaac from Penn State, Chris Braswell, Alabama, Austin Booker, Kansas, Jonah Ellis, Utah, guys that are not, you're not going to plug them in from day one and they're going to be every down starters, but you can work them in the mix. They can be part of a rotation. They can help give you fresh legs and help create that disruption that you're looking for. So we talk about premium positions. That's what the Commanders, as we have a new regime coming in, ownership all the way down. They want to hit on some of these premium positions, the pillars of what you want your roster to be, starting with quarterback, but then you look at tackle, edge rusher. They went corner in the first round last year. So I think hitting on these premium positions should absolutely be the goal as they go into this draft.
Absolutely. And then we turn the page to day 3. They don't have a 4th round pick. So to start day 3 as it stands right now, they're going to be waiting a while before they make their first pick. This class better than most, if not anybody else, with all the research you've done. Is this 4th round grouping that you project to be there in the 4th round worth the Commanders packaging some late picks, maybe some future late picks to move up this year?
Yeah, I think you always look to move up. This is a draft that is better in the first round in the top 100 than it is necessarily depth. And it depends on the position. Some positions are going to stretch. Wide receiver, you're going to be able to find receivers that maybe you don't love your fourth round receivers, but you have plenty of options that you're going to like. You know, whether it's a Jacob Cowing from Arizona, Malik Washington from Virginia, Jalen McMillan from Washington. There's going to be plenty of receivers that you're going to feel comfortable with at that point. I think you could say the same thing about corners. There's a lot of good corners in this class. You could go that direction, say the second round with a TJ Tampa from Iowa State, or you could wait to the fourth round, and I think you have plenty of options. So, but with the number of draft picks that this team does have, I don't think that'd be surprising at all if they package a few to go up and get your guy, whether that's maybe trading up earlier in the second round, trading up earlier in the third round. Certain positions do fall off a cliff in terms of the depth and the tier system, and every team's going to look at it a little bit differently. And so if, the Commanders, they're looking at offensive line and they've got a certain number of guys they believe are starter level, or they have that type of projection, then maybe they would make a move to go up, make sure they secure their guys so they're not left with the scraps and guys they project as backups and not quality depth. So I think even though it's nice to have extra draft capital, it's even better to have the guys you project as starters. And I don't think it'd be surprising at all if we see the Commanders be a little aggressive with using the draft capital to go up and get their player.
Absolutely. All right. He's Dane Brugler, NFL draft analyst from The Athletic, author of The Beast. Well worth the subscription to The Athletic. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you do that. Check that out. And also follow Dane at DP Brugler on Twitter. Dane, thanks for joining us, man.
Anytime. Thank you.
Once again, a big thank you to Dane Brugler of The Athletic for joining us, giving us some of his time. And again, if you have not checked out The Beast, you need to check it out. 300 plus pages of draft content and cover. Like it's amazing, guys. You get backstories, you get scouting reports. It's definitely well worth the price of a subscription. And I think I saw there's like a special right now where you can get at least a couple months, I think, for like 50 cents or $2 or something. Definitely well worth the price. So even if you only do it for a month, get The Beast and then unsubscribe. Hey, that's what you do to protect your money, right? We got a couple of questions that did not make the last mailbag, did not make the interview with Dane Brugler. Unfortunately, did have a limited time to spend with him. So we're going to hit those questions to wrap up today's episode. Also, if you want to hear more, Dane, about the NFL draft, not Commanders specific, but about the NFL draft in general, go check out Locked On NFL, the Friday episode with myself and Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars. Dane stuck around. We had 10 minutes for Commanders, 10 minutes for NFL. So if you want 10 more minutes with Dane Brugler, head over to Locked On NFL after you watch the rest of this episode. Questions coming up next on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders with a couple of questions that didn't make the last mailbag, didn't make the interview with Dane Brugler, but they're very good draft questions, so I definitely want to go ahead and address them here. One coming from Reverend Jim Insider, one of our recent insiders, so appreciate you, Reverend, for coming through. But the Reverend came through and said, assuming the Commanders draft a quarterback with the number 2 pick, which is what we mostly assume, I think, why is Marcus Mariota a better mentor / fill-in than Jacoby Brissett would have been? What pick should the Commanders expend on a running back, if any? So a two-parter here. And I'll talk about Jacoby Brissett and Marcus Mariota first and foremost. And I think Dane probably would have kind of taken a similar type of path. It's hard to tell how good of a mentor someone is going to be until you actually get the chance to kind of see it happening and get the opportunity to meet them and see what happens in the locker room dynamic. I can tell you just from getting to know Jacoby Brissett last year, the dude he's a team-focused guy. He's a great mentor to have in the locker room, great supporter of Sam Howell. He and Jake Fromm and Sam Howell all had several conversations with see them. And some of the times they had downtime, there was like a little like Nerf basketball hoop in the locker room. You'd see them hanging out, playing some cards when they had the opportunities to, because yes, NFL players get some downtime. It's okay. So Jacoby, amazing mentor. Is Marcus Mariota going to be better? I can't tell you that he's going to be better. And I can't necessarily tell you that it was so much about getting him a better mentor in that sense versus helping a young quarterback learn the language, the system, and the style of play they're going to bring in. Remember, Brian Johnson, former offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles, is now an assistant head coach and offensive pass game coordinator for the Washington Commanders. So while Cliff Kingsbury is the offensive coordinator in general, overall, Brian Johnson is the offensive passing game coordinator and has the assistant head coach title. So I'm not saying that Brian's going to be like, no, Cliff, here's what we're doing in the passing game, but it's definitely going to be a little bit of a blend of what Cliff has done in the past, what Brian Johnson has learned in his time in the NFL. And then, of course, specifically with the Philadelphia Eagles, Marcus Mariota spent last year with the Philadelphia Eagles, knows the system, knows the language that, you at least assume is going to be part of it, right? And so when you talk about young quarterbacks, where do they typically struggle? They struggle to catch up with the speed of the game. They struggle to catch up with the mentality of the game, and they struggle in the language. And a lot of it is the checks, how to make the reads, when to make the reads, where to make the reads, the calls, all that stuff. Well, if Brian Johnson, and that's what this kind of tells me, that Brian Johnson's version of the pass game and maybe language and the way that it's coordinated and put together is going to be a little bit more influential than, say, Cliff Kingsbury's of the past. Then I think that's the main reason Marcus Mariota comes in, is because you bring someone who is fluent in that language to help this young quarterback, whether it be Drake, whether it be Jayden, or in a surprise, Caleb Williams or J.J. McCarthy. Whoever it is, Marcus Mariota knows Brian Johnson will be able to be that locker room player bridge between the coach and the rookie to make sure that there is a smooth, because, look, people are people. And there might be a conversation between Coach Johnson and this rookie quarterback where someone gets their feelings hurt, someone isn't happy, or someone doesn't understand fully. And Marcus can kind of be that mediator who is experienced and old enough to understand what it's like to be in the league for a while and kind of sees the coach's point of view, but also knows where this young quarterback is coming from. I mean, Marcus himself was a number 2 overall pick, remember. So if the Commanders pick at number 2, he's literally going to be mentoring someone who's coming in the league in the exact same situation. He is a number 2 overall pick, expected to be the savior of a franchise. So I think that's the reason. Also, might have been a little bit of sprinkling in there of let's get rid of the old regime, right? We've seen this team not re-sign most of the old regime's players. We've seen them trade Sam Howell. We've seen them get rid of most of the coaching staff. And a lot of the coaching staff that they did keep were honestly relatively newer members of the coaching staff, right? Bobby Ingram is only in his second year with the Commanders this year. Tavita Pritchard, quarterback coach, same thing. Ryan Kerrigan was, he's in his third year. But relatively new addition to the coaching staff, and honestly, he's Ryan Kerrigan. I think it's a pretty smart move to keep him, even if it's only going to be for a short period of time, which I don't think it is. I think Coach Kerrigan is doing very well, so I think he'll be around for a while. So I think that's another part of it too. Is it's nothing against Jacoby, but it's just like this is a fresh start. This is a fresh move. Let's just make everything fresh, right? So I think that's really why it happened. I don't necessarily think it's in a vacuum. Marcus is better than Jacoby. I think when you add all those contextual factors in, I think that's why Marcus made more sense for this staff at this time. As far as what picks should the Commanders expend on a running back, obviously running back is one of the weaker classes in this year's NFL draft. Dane didn't say that it's the weakest necessarily, but I think linebacker, running back, probably 2 of those same. But you have Brian Robinson Jr., you've got Austin Eckler, you have Chris Rodriguez, and then you've got 3 solid guys that you can lean on, rely on. I don't think that that's going to be it, but I think that if you're the Washington Commanders, you don't feel any pressure to go get a running back anywhere. So because of that, I think you're probably looking day 3. And I look at a guy like Laube out of South Dakota State as a potential late round pick, type of guy. But at the same time, I mean, look, if there's a guy like, say, Blake Corum out of Michigan who you have a grade on, maybe it's a day 2 grade and he's there in like the 5th or 6th round, you might just go ahead and pull the trigger on it just because, you have such a higher grade and it's kind of rare to find that type of talent in those locations. But I think day 3, if you draft a running back, day 3 is probably where you're looking for that. Michael came through with another question. Not much is ever really talked about drafty academics and how majors, GPAs, honor societies, et cetera, play into factors for selections. I've listened to multiple interviews of all the top quarterbacks, and to be honest, neither Jayden Daniels or Drake Maye are well spoken, especially Jayden Daniels. The one position I want some IQ is at quarterback. Your thoughts? So I would say that there is a difference, in my opinion, between being well spoken and being intelligent. I've known a lot of very intelligent, very competent, very smart professionals in their field who couldn't tell you what they do without stuttering and stammering all over themselves. And in the NFL, there's not really what you would call like a business lingo in terms of like how you present yourself, right? So like every office, every profession kind of has, this whole thing, even like in the Army, in the military, even though our job is very dirty, it's very dingy, it's, there's violence involved and all this stuff, you're still expected to, as you get older and as you grow up in the profession, you're expected to be able to speak as a professional and speak clearly and be able to do those types of things. In the NFL, like you would obviously love, the quarterbacks can be the face of the franchise. So obviously they have a little bit of a different type of measurement. So certainly they're going to be more pressure to be able to speak well, and they're going to speak to the media every week as a starting quarterback, and especially after every game. So you want them to be able to handle themselves in that type of a situation. But as far as the tone or tenor of the way that they speak, that's not really something that the league puts a lot of focus on. Now, as far as academics are concerned, academics play a role. Certainly, you like the smarter players. I think Bill Parcells always wanted like graduates. You know what I mean? He wants to see guys who get the job done and see things out through the end. But at the same time, you know, again, intelligence is contextual sometimes, right? Like if you have a young guy who is getting a C in history, maybe he's just not really strong in history. I can tell you right now, I was always really weak at science. But once I got into the Army, once I became an explosive detector dog, handler, trainer, kennel master, all that stuff, I got really good at the science of how odors operate, how odors mix, how they interact with your environment, right? The sciences of what different compounds do when they touch each other, when they mix with each other, or when they're used in conjunction with each other. That kind of science I got really good at really fast. Your traditional kind of science, not really my cup of tea. I took an astrology class in college when I was with Arizona State. I'll tell you right now, I got like a C in that bad boy, and I earned that C. Like I grinded for that C. Astrology and I just did not like, I'm like measuring moons and like weighing gases and like doing all this. Like, I don't know, guys. I don't know. I'm glad the weight of Jupiter or whatever doesn't have anything to do with whether or not a football can fly through the air, because I would not be doing the job I'm doing today. So again, you know, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. It certainly does matter. But again, everything is kind of contextual, right? So I will tell you that a lot of information is dug up by scouts. This time of year, we're not going to talk about it a lot, but you know, if you have a player who's skipping classes, not going to classes, gets caught trying to cheat on a test, those types of things, some of those stuff will make it to light, but even some of the stuff that doesn't make it to light will certainly make it to the NFL circles, certainly make it to the general managers, and certainly will have an impact. So again, you know, I can't tell you, and honestly, I'll tell you too, and actually, if you read Dane Brugler's draft profile of Drake Maye, there's actually a scout that he quotes in there that says that the Gee Golly act by Drake Maye when he speaks publicly is an act, and he's much more of an intense type of person than he lets on in his public persona. So there's even an aspect of that too, of, you know, trying to make sure they portray themselves in a specific kind of way. So you know, so yes, the academics matter. The GPAs, maybe not as much as like the effort in the classroom, the dedication to learning, because again, if you can't do, you know, if you're not good in history class, but you're really good on the chalkboard in the NFL, we're more concerned about you being really good in the chalkboard in the NFL than you are, you know, remembering what year the Constitution was signed, stuff like that. So it matters, but it matters within context, if that makes sense. So great questions, guys. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed the interview with Dane Brugler. It was really a lot of fun to talk to him. Again, if you want to hear more from Dane about the NFL draft class just in general, head over to Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins and myself on the Friday episode, and you can get more of Dane there. Until the next time we speak, if you have any questions or comments, drop them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly, insiders, by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Don't forget, check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.